All right. So today we'll go learn about the final two things, which is the orbital angular momentum and the spin. Okay. So I don't know. Do we need a recap of what we did in the previous class? I don't know why it's not admitting people automatically. Maybe the settings are different. Anyway, okay, let me anyway do a recap of yesterday's class so that everyone is on the same page. So yesterday we talked about Stark effect, and this is the counterpart of Zeeman effect. Zeeman effect was for magnetic field, and Stark effect is for electric field. So essentially, if an atom or if a quantum particle, right? Um, or in this case, if an atom, for example, a hydrogen atom, is in the presence of an electric field, then what happens is that there will be an extra energy that will be associated because of the electric field. So apart from the energy of the hydrogen atom, you will have some extra energy delta E, and that energy delta E is going to be proportional to the square of the electric field. That is what we saw yesterday, right? So that extra energy, so energy will become E plus delta E, and delta E will be proportional to epsilon square, which is the magnitude of electric field. Okay, so this energy shift, right? This extra energy that is imparted because of the electric field is known as the Stark effect. Okay, and in Zeeman effect, if you recollect, you had basically a splitting of the energy levels. So if so, initially without electric field, all the n levels were at the same energy. But once you apply a magnetic field, then the n levels split into three or four, like into that many uh, states, depending on how many n levels there are. So for L equal to 1, there are three n values. So under a magnetic field, it's split into three energy levels. If for any L equal to 2, there are five n values. So under a magnetic field, it would split into five levels, five energy levels. So that is the difference between Zeeman effect and Stark effect. Okay. And then I think we talked about rigid rotor. So in rigid rotor, we saw that it's a two body problem sort of. So there are two masses connected to each other, right? And the distance between the two masses are fixed, which is r. So essentially, this rigid rotor is a model for the diatomic molecule, right? And so the idea is how do these what are the rotational, or how do these molecules rotate? Okay, so the idea is if R is fixed and N1 and N2 are the two masses, then what you do is there is only kinetic energy because the N2 is doing a rotation about the uh, M1 if M1 is kept at the origin, right? So in that case, there is only this rotational kinetic energy in the Hamiltonian, and there is no potential energy because R is fixed. So that is what we have in the Hamiltonian. You're going to have only the kinetic energy part, which is this part. And because there is spherical symmetry, this part again can be written in terms of spherical coordinates. So del square will be changed into spherical coordinates, but it won't have the r part, right? Because r is constant, so there will not be any differentiation with respect to r. So only differentiations will be with respect to theta and phi. And so this Hamiltonian now becomes similar to what we had in the hydrogen atom for the theta and phi part. And so you can see what are the solutions. So essentially you again get the spherical harmonic solution. So you'll get finally the wave function will be y ln, and energy will be h cross square by 2y into L into L plus 1. Okay, so this is your energy. All right, so here I think we did look at L square and Lz, right? Okay. And then other thing that we talked about, that energy transitions are allowed. So transition from one state to another state is allowed, but the transition should only change by one. So you can either go one level up in energy or you can go one level down in energy, but you cannot go more than that or less than that. Okay, so delta L needs to be plus or minus 1, and this is known as a selection rule in spectroscopy. So if you look at the frequency of the rigid rotor, using all of these formulas, you can get the frequency. The frequency lies in the microwave region of the electromagnetic radiation. So this whole concept of rigid rotor is used in microwave spectroscopy when you want to look at what is the rotational frequency of any molecule. And that way you know how rigid or like how the molecule is rotating, right? Or how a particular bond is even rotating. Okay, so that leads to your microwave spectroscopy. All right. Then we also looked at helium atom and we wrote down the what did we write down? We wrote down the Hamiltonian for the helium atom. Okay, so helium atom is a three-body problem because it has two electrons, one nucleus. Okay, now nucleus is considered to be very heavy compared. I mean, it is true, right? It's a fact that nucleus is very heavy compared to the electrons. So here, as an approximation, we assume that the nucleus is fixed at the origin because it's more heavy, so it's more localized. So it's fixed at the origin, whereas the electrons are moving around the nucleus. Okay, so in that case, what you say that the nucleus is fixed and the electrons are moving about. So then you only consider the motion of the electrons, okay, and you don't consider the motion of the nucleus. So in that case, now you have to write the Hamiltonian. So there will be a kinetic energy associated with electron 1, kinetic energy associated with electron 2, okay. Then there will be potential energies. Now, potential energy for a hydrogen atom or for any such atom is in terms of Coulombic potential. Okay, so there will be three potential energies: potential energy for interaction between electron 1 and nucleus, potential energy for interaction between electron 2 and nucleus, and potential energy for interaction between the two electrons. Okay, so that is what finally the Hamiltonian turns out to be. So two kinetic energies and three potential energies, 1, 2, and 3. Three potential energy, and over here there is a factor of 2 because you are looking at the potential energy or the interaction between electron and nucleus. And because this helium atom has atomic number 2, Z turns out to be 2. Okay, so this is your Hamiltonian. And like I said yesterday, this cannot really be solved exactly. Okay, because just like we did for a hydrogen atom, we cannot do it the same way because this third potential energy, this complicates the solution or trying to solve it. So then we have to resort to approximation methods. Okay, and there are two kinds of approximation methods most commonly used, and one is the perturbation theory and the other is variational method. Okay, so this is where I stopped yesterday. All right, so I'll share the notes with you guys. You should go through them. And so now let's see the last part of this course. Okay, we are right at the fag end of this course. Okay, so today we are going to look at orbital angular momentum and spin. Okay, so now orbital angular momentum is basically your angular momentum which is happening around a certain object, okay, or a certain axis. For example, if you consider the Earth, then the orbital angular momentum in the case of the Earth would be that it is rotating around the sun, right? So since it's going around the sun, that is your orbital angular momentum. Okay, all right. So angular momentum, just like in the classical case, angular momentum is defined as r cross p. So here for quantum mechanics also, it is the same kind of definition, which is r cross p. And this p can be written in terms of the del operator also. So we can also write it in terms of minus ih cross r cross del. Okay. So this is these two are the same thing essentially. Okay, so if you look at r cross del, you can do it in the matrix way. So you put I, j, k, x, y, z, dou by dou x, dou by dou y, dou by dou z. Okay, and so you'll get minus ih cross into this. You have to just compute the determinant here. Okay, that's what we have done here. We have computed the determinant, and you'll get lxi plus lyj plus lzk. Okay, so if you see the individual components come from the determinant. Okay, all right. So the individual components come from the determinant, and so you can specify what is Lx, Ly, and Lz. So it can also be written in terms of the differentiation operators, or it can be written in terms of Px, Py, Pz, right? So that is the same thing that I've written, because Pz is essentially minus IH cross dou by dou z, right? Py is minus IH cross dou by dou y. Okay, that we already know, right? The momentum operator is essentially minus IH cross into dou by Px, right? Px operator is minus IH cross into dou by dou x. So we already know what a momentum operator is. So we can either write it in the differentiation form, or we can write it in terms of the momentum variables. Okay, so these are the same things. All right. So now we should also look at the commutator relations between all of these operators. Okay, so if you look, Lx and Ly do not commute with each other. Okay, and physically, what does this mean? Physically, this means that we can, if two operators do not commute with each other, it means that those two, the observables from those two operators cannot be measured simultaneously, right? Which means if you now measure the observable corresponding to Lx and measure the observable corresponding to Ly, those two observables cannot be measured simultaneously with arbitrary accuracy. So there will be some uncertainty principle that it will follow. Okay, and that uncertainty principle will be basically, right, delta Lx, delta Ly should be greater than equal to h cross by 2, right? So that uncertainty principle it will follow. So Lx, so what exactly is the commutator relation then? If it does not commute, then basically Lx Ly commutator is equal to IH cross Lz. Okay, and there is a cyclic relation between all of this. So L by Lz commutator is IH cross Lx, and then you can imagine that Lz Lx operator, Lz Lx commutator is IH cross Ly. Okay, that's what I have written. So there is a cyclic relation. So any any two components of the angular momentum, the commutator of those two components is equal to IH cross into the third component. Okay, so this is your formula for the commutator relation. Okay. So this obviously can be proved, right? You can obviously prove this. All you have to do is you take these formulas that we have specified here. Okay, Lx is given by this, Ly is given by this, Lz is given by this, and you apply each of these to a function, and then you can prove that this commutator will be equal to this. Okay, so one way you can do this is you can apply this commutator to a function and see what you finally get. Okay, this is a very tedious method. So this is one way to do it. The other way to do it is to use already known formulas. Okay, so in that case you can write it in terms of the momentum operators, right? We have already seen Lx is ypz minus zpy, Ly is zpx minus xpz, right? So this we have already seen. Okay, so we can write it in terms of these momentum operators, right? So where did it go? So here. Okay, we write it in terms of momentum operators and we'll get this. Okay, so now all we have to do is we have to then this is the commutator, so then we take the commutator relation, which is, right, a b would be a b minus ba, so that's what we are doing here, and then we open up all the brackets, so we'll get all of these 8 terms that we'll get. Now these 8 terms can be like you can see what are the commonalities between these 8 terms. So one such term would be ypz zpx minus zpx ypz. So this is also almost like a commutator relation, right? So this is a commutator relation between ypz and zpx. Similarly, if you look at this term, there is xpz ypz minus ypz xpz. So this is also a commutator relation between xpz and ypz, right? So in this manner, you can write down 4 different commutator relations. Okay, so once you write down 4, now what you do is you take each of these individual commutator relations and see how you can simplify it further. So the first one is YPZ ZPX commutator relation. So let's try to simplify it further. So what we'll do is we'll use the distributive property of the commutator relation. Okay, please go back and check. Right, we have already learned this probably in the second or third chapter, probably in the second chapter. Okay, so we use the distributive property. So if you want to look at, if you want to simplify this particular commutator relation, what we do y, we take y outside because y is in the front. So we take y outside and then we do pz zpx. And then we keep y in and we take pz outside. So pz is on the right side. So we have to take it out on the right side. So then we get y into comma zpx into pz. So this is your distributive property. Okay. All right. Then we can do it further for these ZPX also. Okay, so then what we'll get y PZZ into PX plus YZ into PZPX. Okay, and then similarly the other two terms. Now PZZ relation we already know. The commutator relation between ZPZ is IH cross. So the commutator relation between PZZ would be minus IH cross. Okay, this we already know again from our second chapter. Okay, so please, so you can see that everything that we learned so far is being applied here. Okay, so if you don't understand it or if you are having difficulty recalling all this, please go back and look at the previous chapters and see where this comes from. Okay, so this is all the stuff that we have already learned. Okay, in this course. So PZZ commutator relation is minus IH cross. PZPX do not, PZPX commute with each other. So this goes at 0. YPX commute with each other. So this is also 0. And YZ commutes with each other. So this is also 0. Okay, so all these three terms turn out to be 0. And all you are left with is minus IH cross YPX. Okay, so this is what you have. Okay. Similarly, you can do for the second term. Second term was the commutator relation XPZ YPZ. Okay, so when you do apply, first you apply the distributive properties and then you see what are the commutators that turn out to be 0. And here all the terms turn out to be 0. Okay, so this one is 0. Similarly, third commutator relation also turns out to be 0. Okay, remember that PZ obviously commutes with PZ, right? Individual components commute with themselves. That is always true, no matter what the operator is, right? For example, H will commute with H, right? Or LX will commute with LX. That is always true. Second thing is, in the case of momentum, Y and PZ commute with each other, right? Because you cannot know y and py simultaneously, but you can measure y and pz or y and px simultaneously. So this also commutes, and this xy also commutes. Okay, so these are some things that you should be aware of. Okay, so third one is also 0, and then the fourth commutator relation has one term which is non-zero, which is this term x z pz into py. So z pz commutator is given by IH cross, and then you have x into py. So you have IH cross x into py. So if you combine all of this, finally you're going to get minus IH cross ypx plus IH cross xpy. So this is also a commutator relation. So you take IH cross outside, you'll get xpy minus ypx. Okay. Sorry, no, this is not a commutator relation, but this is your xpy minus ypx. So xpy minus ypx into IH cross is your, xpy minus ypx is nothing but your LZ operator. Okay, this, if you go back and look at the formula, xpy minus ypx, this is your LZ operator. Okay, and that is what we have got finally. Okay. All right. Any questions up to this part? You understand how we did this. So you should be able to do such problems. Okay. You just have to simplify the commutator relations and then apply all the formulas, all the properties that we have already studied and try to simplify it and derive the relation. Okay. Let me know if you have any questions. All right. So similarly, we can get using the same kind of procedure, we'll get these two formulas also, which we have already discussed. That is, commutator of Ly Lz is going to be IH cross Lx. Commutator of Lz Lx is IH cross Ly. Okay, so this is the same thing. All right. So I'm giving you a small homework. Okay, X commutator, you have to find the commutator of X Lx, and you have to find the commutator of Px Lx. Okay, and see what is the answer that you. Okay, now there is another operator called L square operator, and that is given by Lx square plus Ly square plus Lz square. Okay, so this is your L square operator. Okay, and all of these four operators that we have looked at so far, Lx, Ly, Lz, and L square, all of these are Hermitian operators, obviously, right? Because these correspond to some observable. So if these correspond to some observable, it means that they are the observables are real quantities, right? And only Hermitian or Hermitian operators have the property that the eigenvalues of the operators are real. Okay, so all of these operators are Hermitian operators. I hope you still remember what are the properties of Hermitian operators. Okay. So Hermitian operators have two properties. One is that all the eigenvalues of Hermitian operators are real, and second property is that the eigenvectors are orthogonal to each other. Right? Those are the two properties. Okay, so this is going to be satisfied. All right. So now that you have seen all of this, you can also find what is the uncertainty relation delta Lx, delta Ly. Okay, so this is something that you should try and see how to do this. Okay, you already know what is the formula, right? The formula in terms of operators you already know for uncertainty. So you have to just apply that formula and see what is the uncertainty relation that you get. Okay, so please try out this problem. Okay, now we have looked at L square, we have looked at Lx, Ly, Lz. So there is also a commutator relation between L square and Lx, Ly, Lz. Okay, and that is basically 0. So basically L square commutes with Lx, L square commutes with Ly, and L square commutes with Lz. Okay, which means that we can measure L square and Lx observables simultaneously, right? That is what it means when you say that something commutes with something else, right? Those two observables can be measured simultaneously with arbitrary accuracy. Similarly for L square Ly, and similarly for L square Lz. Okay. All right. So now that these are operators, obviously, if you apply these onto an eigenfunction or a wave function, you have to get some eigenvalue. Okay, so the eigenvalue of this L square operator is essentially h cross square into L plus 1. So this is your eigenvalue. And eigenvalue of the Lz operator is mh cross, right? Mh cross is the eigenvalue of the mz operator. Okay, so you have these two as the eigenvalues. And what are the eigenfunctions? The eigenfunctions are essentially spherical harmonic. So this is the same angular part of the hydrogen atom problem. Okay, y lm theta phi is exactly the same eigenfunction as we got for the angular part of the hydrogen atom problem. Okay, so sometimes this y lm theta of theta comma phi is also written as L comma m in the ket format. Okay, so right, because there are two quantum numbers that this depends on, so it is also written as L comma m. So if L is 2, m is 0, then it will be written as ket of 2 comma 0. Okay, this is just a convention of writing this. So sometimes you don't always want to write this, and you want to use the matrix algebra method, okay, to deal with all the operators and the eigenvalues, eigenfunctions, and also you write it in the ket format. And the ket format would be L comma m. Okay, so these are the properties of this angular momentum operators. Okay, then there are some other operators that you can define, which is like a ladder operator, okay, which is L plus and L minus. Okay, L plus is given as Lx plus ILy, and L minus is given as Lx minus ILy. Okay, so now if you and this L plus L minus dou is not a Hermitian operator. Okay, all right. So L plus acting on L comma n would give you h cross root of L into L plus 1 minus m into n plus 1. Okay, so that would be your eigenvalue. And the state would change from Lm to L comma n plus 1. So that's why we say that it is a ladder operator. So if you apply this L plus operator on Lm, you are changing the state from Lm to Lm plus 1. So you're going one up in the m energy, m state. Okay, and if you apply the L minus operator, you are going one down in the m state. You are finally the state that you are getting is L comma n minus 1. Okay, so this is your, and then the eigenvalue that you get is for L minus, the eigenvalue that you get is h cross root of L into L plus 1 minus m into m minus 1. Okay, so that is the difference between these two. So L plus and L minus are ladder operators. And if you apply L plus, you are going one level up in the M state. And if you apply L minus, you are going one level down in the M state. And so that's why these are called ladder operators. Okay, now this is the same thing just like in the hydrogen atom. So for any value of L, there are two L plus one M values, right? So M goes from minus L plus 1 and so on up to L minus 1 and L, right? So for L equal to 1, you would have n values that it can take are minus 1, 0 and plus 1. So basically there is a threefold degeneracy, okay, that you get for L equal to 1. For L equal to 2, you will get a fivefold degeneracy because the n values will be minus 2, minus 1, 0, 1 and 2. Okay, I hope this is clear. All right. Okay, so any questions up to this part, because we have almost completed the orbital angular momentum part. Do you have any questions? Okay, please do the homework problems that I've given you for practice. Okay, if you do them, you'll get some idea as to how to deal with such problems. All right. Okay. So next we go to spin. Let me know if you have any questions. All right. So next we go to spin. Okay. Now imagine a classical system. All right. So I took the example of Earth, right? I said that when the Earth revolves around the sun, and that takes 365 days, right? It takes a year for Earth to revolve around the sun. That represents your orbital angular momentum. Okay. But the Earth also revolves around its own axis, right? Which takes 24 hours, right? That is a 24-hour day, right? When it revolves around its own axis. And that is known as the spin angular momentum. Okay. Okay. So in the classical sense, that is the difference between the two. So orbital angular momentum refers to the motion of the center of mass, meaning the entire object itself is moving, okay, around something else. And spin angular momentum is the motion about the center of mass. So that means the object is moving around its own axis. Okay, so that is the difference between the two angular momentums. But that is in the classical sense. In the quantum mechanical sense, there is an analogous orbital angular momentum and spin angular momentum. Okay, orbital angular momentum we have already seen, which is the LZ, L and L square operators, right? That we just saw it right now. But spin angular momentum, even though it is analogous, right? Even though in the quantum mechanics also you have a spin angular momentum, but what it represents is slightly different. Okay, in the classical sense, what spin angular momentum represents is that that object is moving around its own axis, right? That is what you mean by spin angular momentum in the classical sense. But in the quantum mechanical sense, the object is a structureless object, right? So if you consider an electron does not really have any structure, right? So if it is a structureless object, In that case, you cannot say that it is moving about its own axis because it is already structureless. Okay, so essentially you don't say that it is, moving about its own axis, or you don't define how it is moving, because there is no spatial correlation between how it is moving and what the, spatial values change. Like if you consider for the angular orbital angular momentum, you know that it changes in space. So theta and phi are the angles that change, right? In the case of spin angular momentum, there is no r theta phi at all, because in the spatial uh, variables do not matter, because it is a structureless object that is having some spin. Okay, all right, so that is what I've written here. So let's read it. Okay, there is something analogous in quantum mechanics. Electron, for example, has orbital angular momentum L because of its motion around the nucleus. Okay, this is pretty clear. Electron also has a spin, but this spin has nothing to do with the motion, because electron is not a structured point particle. Okay, so it does not have any structure. Electron does not have any structure. So the spin is not a function of position variables like r, theta, and phi. Okay, so spin, when we say spin of a quantum mechanical particle, we say that spin is the intrinsic angular momentum that a quantum mechanical particle has. Okay, so it's an intrinsic angular momentum, but we cannot define how, or we cannot visualize how it is, changing, because because the object itself is structureless, so the way that it is moving itself is also not really defined. Okay, so spin is known as the intrinsic angular momentum that every quantum particle has. Okay, and orbital angular momentum is the extrinsic angular momentum of the quantum particle. Okay, so now you know what spin is, but we cannot really define its structure, or we cannot really define how it is going to move. Okay, that is something we do not know, but we have seen in experiments that um, you will get two particular states. Like for an electron, you get two particular states because it has a spin equal to half. Okay, so that is something that has been observed in experiments, but nobody can say how the motion is, because the electron itself is structureless, so the motion is also not defined. Okay. Now, spin algebra is a carbon copy of the orbital angular momentum algebra. So, all these commutator relations and everything that we defined for, that we proved and defined for the orbital angular momentum, same thing is applied to the spin angular momentum also. Okay, so let's look at it. So, again, the commutator algebra for the spin, Sx, commutator of Sx with Sy gives you IH cross Sz. Commutator of Sy with Sz gives you IH cross Sx. Commutator of Sz with Sx gives you IH cross Sy. Okay, so same kind of formulas we had. Okay, for angular orbital angular momentum as well as spin angular momentum. The formulas are very same. Okay, just that these variables are the corresponding to the spin variables. Okay. Again, we have S square and Sz commute with each other, so the commutator relation is 0. Okay. So now instead of writing Ln as the wave function, we will write S comma ms as the wave function. Okay. So S square, if it operates on the wave function S comma ms, then we will get h cross square into S plus 1. That is the eigenvalue multiplied with the wave function, which is S comma ms. I hope this is clear. Again, Sz, if the operator Sz acts on the wave function, then we will get the eigenvalue h cross ms. Okay, ms is the m quantum number for the spin, right? So that's why we write it as ms. Like there is a difference between m and ms. Okay, m is the m quantum number, magnetic quantum number for the orbital angular momentum. Ms is the magnetic quantum number for the spin angular momentum. Okay, so there is a difference between these two. So Sz operator acting on the wave function gives you the eigenvalue h cross ms into the wave function. Okay, so ms again, just like your m values, ms also takes values from minus s to plus s. And the degeneracy is 2s plus 1. Okay, so there are 2s plus 1 values of ms for every value of s. Okay, that is pretty same. It is exactly the same as your orbital angular momentum. So now you also define S plus and S minus, just like you did it for the orbital angular momentum. You can define S plus and S minus. S plus is Sx plus Isy. S minus is Sx minus Isy. Okay. So now you have S plus minus acting on S comma ms. You will get this eigenvalue as root over S into S plus 1 minus ms into ms plus or minus 1. And the state changes from SMS to SMS plus or minus 1. So for S plus ladder operator, so you are going one level up in the MS state. And for S minus ladder operator, you're going one level down in the MS state. So you're going from SMS to SMS minus 1. Okay? All right. So these are your operators. Second thing is you can also always write Sx square or Sy square in terms of half into S square minus Sz square. Okay, this is also some kind of relation. Okay, and these are your expectation value. When you write some operator inside your angular bracket, it means that represents expectation value. And we know what we mean by expectation value, right? We mean that the operator is sandwiched between a bra and a ket. Okay. Any questions? Let me know if you have any questions. Okay. Right. We are all right in this chapter. We are just using everything that we have learned in all the previous chapters and applying it over here. Okay. There is nothing much different. Okay. Then all of these operators are defined, and we say that the spin states form an orthonormal and complete basis. Okay, so this represents your orthonormal basis, meaning that if the two states are different from each other, the scalar product of that will be 0. If they are same, then it will be 1. Okay, that's what a delta function represents. Dirac delta, a Kronecker delta function. And then it also forms a complete basis. So what do you mean by complete basis? If ms goes from ms equal to minus s to s, and then you multiply ket with a bra, it will give you the identity matrix, right? So that is your I. So this forms a complete basis. Okay. Now what are the values that spin can take? For example, in the orbital angular momentum case, L could take integer values, only positive integer values, 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Right? In the case of spin, it can take both integer and half integer values. Okay, they have to be positive, but it can take both integer and half integer. So it can take values like 0, half, 1, 3 by 2, right? 2, 5 by 2, and so on. So those are the kind of values that spin can take. Okay, and each quantum particle has a particular value of spin, and that cannot change. For example, hydrogen. If you look at a hydrogen atom, okay, the L values that it can take, right? It in the ground state it takes a value of L equal to 0. But if you go to the higher states, then the value of L changes, right? L can be 1. Then if you go to much higher state, L can be 2, and so on, right? So for the same atom, you can multiple states can be achieved for in the case of L. If you just increase the energy level, if you go higher and higher in the energy level. But a spin is something that cannot change. Okay, for an electron, S is half, and it is always half. No matter what energy level you go to, S is always going to be half for an electron. Okay, similarly for a photon, S is equal to 1. Okay, so if S is equal to 1 for photon, no matter how much energy you give, S is always going to be equal to 1. Okay, there is no transition from S equal to 1 to something else. Okay, so spin is something that is always same and fixed for every particular quantum particle. Okay, that is the difference between spin and your orbital angular momentum. Okay, this is one of the major differences. So for example, I've listed some examples here. So pi meson is a quantum particle. It has spin equal to 0. Photon is again a quantum particle. It has a spin equal to 1. Electron, proton, and neutrons, all of these are quantum particles. These have spin equal to half. Delta is another quantum particle. It has spin equal to 3 by 2. Okay, so on and so forth. Like you can define, people have found out what the spin is for every single quantum particle that there exists. Okay, all right. And the total angular momentum J is equal to L plus S. Okay, when you want to look at the what is the total angular momentum, then you basically add the orbital angular momentum with the spin angular momentum, and that gives you your total angular momentum. Okay, all right. Is this clear? Any questions up to this point? Okay. So now let's look at spin half and Pauli matrices. Okay. So now we have already defined, right, what is SZ, S square, all of these operators. So we'll try to define what is Sx and Sy operator also. So sometimes it's very easy to write Ss and Sy operators if you define some matrices. Okay, that's why we call these Pauli matrices. So anyway, so for a particle with spin equal to half. So what is a particle with spin equal to half? So examples of particles with spin equal to half are electron, proton, and neutron. Okay, so these three quantum particles have spin equal to half. All right. So for a particle with spin equal to half, ms will take what values? Ms can go from minus s to plus s. So ms, the lowest value ms will take is minus half. Then you add 1. So minus half plus 1 will become plus half. And that is the highest value it can take. So ms can take minus half and plus half spin ms values for spin equal to half. Okay. So when you write sms, you are actually stating two possible states. One is half half and the other one is half comma minus half. Okay, so these are the two possible states for S comma ms for a particle with spin equal to half. Okay. So now if you apply S square on half comma plus or minus half, you will get h cross square into S plus 1 get half comma plus or minus half. Okay, now since S is equal to half, you can substitute whatever value for S you have here, which is equal to half, and then you will get 3 by 4 h cross square. So this is your actual eigenvalue that you get. Okay, all right. Now you have Sz acting on half comma plus or minus half. So you'll get h cross ms, that is your eigenvalue for half comma plus or minus half. So since ms can take two values, which is plus half and minus half, so there are two possible values for the Sz operator, right? You can see for S square, there is only one possible value, one possible eigenvalue. But for Sz operator, there are two possible eigenvalues. One is h cross by 2 and the other one is minus h cross by 2. Okay, so those are the two possible eigenvalues. Okay. We can also represent S square and Sz in terms of matrices, right? And just like we did for, I think we did this in one of the classes recently, right? I think maybe, don't remember. We did it in the hydrogen atom, sorry, harmonic oscillator case, probably. Yeah, I think that's where we did it. So anyway, so we can also represent, we can also have a matrix representation of these operators, S square and Sz for S equal to half. Okay, this is the case for S equal to half, but similarly, it can also be done for S equal to 3 by 2, S equal to 5 by 2, and so on. Okay, so for S equal to half, what you do is you do half comma half. So S square operator sandwich between half comma half and half comma half. And that is the first element of the matrix. Second element of the matrix would be S square operator sandwich between half comma half and half comma minus half, because that is the ms value that it can take. Okay, one thing you can notice is because ms can take two values, half and minus half, so the matrix of these operators you are going to get as they will be 2 cross 2 matrices. Okay, because ms can take two values, there will be 2 cross 2 matrices. For s equal to 3 by 2, ms can take 5 values. Okay, and in that case, the matrix would be a 5 cross 5 matrix. No, wait. For S equal to 3 by 2, it will be, sorry, 4 cross 4 matrix, because S can take, sorry, MS can take 4 values for S equal to 3 by 2. Right? I hope you get it, why I'm saying MS can take 4 values. So for S equal to 2, MS values will be, can someone tell me what are the MS values for S equal to, sorry, S equal to 3 by 2? Please write down in chat, what are the MS values for S equal to 3 by 2? Come on, try it out, try it out. Okay. S equal to 3 by 2, what are the MS values? Okay, looks like nobody is listening or nobody wants to try. Hmm? Come on, somebody should try it out, right? Okay, you can try it out later because. Alright, so try it out later. What are the possible MS values for S equal to 3 by 2? Anyway, so for the matrix representation, you're going to get this kind of a matrix. So you're going to basically do half, half, and half, half, then half, half, half minus half, and half, and then half minus half minus half. Okay, so that is going to be your, so for all of these expectation values, if you calculate, then you're going to get the matrix representation, and this turns out to be 1001. 3 by 4 h cross square into 1001. Okay, so this you have to, you can try and understand. All right. Okay, so this is your homework. You need to show that the matrix representation for all of these operators are in these particular formats. So if you understand how you have done this, you can, how we have done this, then you can do all of this as well. Okay, it's not going to be difficult. So one thing that we have seen, just like we saw for orbital angular momentum, L square commutes with Lz. Similarly, here in the case of spin, S square commutes with Sz. So S square and Sz share eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Okay, and the eigenvectors corresponding to the common eigenvalues, these are known as the spinners. Okay, or spinors. So for half comma half, we write the eigenvalue as 1, 0. Sorry, eigenvector as 1, 0. And for half comma minus half, we write the eigenvector as 0, 1. Okay, and these two form a complete and orthonormal basis, which you can verify. Okay, so essentially what we do is we can write the eigenfunction of the Sx and Sy operators as a linear combination of these two eigenvectors. Okay, so the linear combination of half half and half minus half. So psi x plus or minus would be 1 by root 2 into ket half half plus or minus ket half minus half. Okay, so half, the this half represents your S value and this half represents your, this minus half represents your MS value. I hope that is clear. Here also this represents S and this represents your MS value. Similarly, there is a formula for psi y. The only difference is that there is a I here. Over here, there is no I, and over here, there is an I. Everything else is same. Okay. So Sx acting on psi x gives you h cross by 2 into psi x. Similarly, Sy acting on psi y gives you h cross by 2 into psi y. Okay. All right. So for S equal to half, basically you can represent every S, whether it be Sx, Sy, or Sz, in terms of h cross by 2 into some matrix sigma. And this sigma is known as the Pauli matrices. So this sigma is different for each of the x, y, and z components. So sigma x is basically this matrix, sigma y is this matrix, and sigma z is this matrix. Okay, so this is like a short form representation for the S operator. And this is useful when we do more problems. Although we are not going to go into that, but still we should know that this S operator can be written in terms of Pauli matrices. Okay, and so Sx is basically h cross by 2 into sigma x, Sy is h cross by 2 into sigma y, and Sz is h cross by 2 into sigma z. And sigma x, sigma y, sigma z, these are Pauli matrices which are operators, okay, representing Sx, Sy, and Hz. Okay, I hope that is clear. So the Pauli matrices have some properties. Okay, these matrices are Hermitian, obviously because they give a observable, which is real, measurable, observable. So obviously the Pauli matrices have to be Hermitian. Then second property is that these matrices are traceless. So you can check. Traceless meaning that if you add up all the diagonal elements, they should give you 0. Right? So 0 and 0 gives you 0, 0 plus 0 gives you 0, and here 1 minus 1 gives you 0. So they are traceless, and these have determinants equal to 1. So here you can also find out the determinant of each matrix, and they will turn out to be 1. So these are the three properties of Pauli matrices, and these properties make it easy for us to compute certain things. Okay. So you can similarly, just like we have found out the matrix representation of Sx, Sy, Sz, etc. You can also find out the matrix representation. Sorry, yeah, like you can find out the matrix representation of Sx, Sy using these formulas and see that they are actually equal to these Pauli matrices formulas that you have got, that we have written here. Okay. So when a particle also has a spin, then apart from the wave function that is in terms of n, l, and m, you also need to multiply it with the spin counterpart. And the spin counterpart is s comma ms. Okay, so this is the basic, the total wave function then is given by the radial part of the wave function, radial and angular part of the wave function multiplied with the spin part of the wave function. And this is how that anything is written. Any questions up to this part?